While Trump's tariffs are set to cost American businesses $82 billion and destroy entire industries, Canada just announced the most audacious infrastructure project in North American history, and Mexico is begging them to share the secret of beating America's economic warfare. Let's begin. You stuck with me past that explosive hook because you sensed something the American media is desperately hiding. The real story behind Canada's explosive growth during Trump's trade war. While CNN panics about tariff costs and Fox celebrates economic nationalism, you're about to understand how Canada transformed America's aggression into the foundation of their own continental empire. The context that escapes most observers started when Trump returned to office in January 2025 and immediately declared war on his closest allies. The escalation seemed to favor America. 35% tariffs on Canada, threats to make them the 51st state, and demands for complete economic submission. By every conventional metric, it looked like American dominance over their northern neighbor was about to be cemented permanently. But here's what you now understand that Washington completely missed. This wasn't economic warfare at all. It was Canada's stress test to prove they'd evolved beyond American dependence, and the results have exceeded their wildest expectations. While Trump celebrated imposing tariffs, Canada quietly began executing the most sophisticated infrastructure and alliance strategy in modern North American history. The timing reveals the strategic depth of Canada's planning. The moment Trump imposed maximum pressure, Canada accelerated three massive initiatives simultaneously: a cross-country energy corridor that would make them energy independent, military partnerships that reduce their reliance on American defense systems, and trade relationships with Mexico that bypass American oversight entirely. These weren't defensive reactions. They were offensive strategies Canada had been preparing for years. The psychological dimension exposes an even more profound shift. While Trump demanded phone calls and public submission, Canada responded by announcing billion-dollar infrastructure projects and hosting Mexican presidents for strategic planning sessions. The contrast was stark. America begging for attention while Canada built the future of North American economics without American participation. The economic data tells the most devastating story for American strategists. While Trump's tariffs are projected to cost American businesses $82 billion directly, Canada's trade surplus with the U.S. actually increased during maximum tariff pressure. This wasn't just economic resilience. It was proof that Canada had achieved something economists thought impossible: tariff-resistant prosperity that actually benefits from American economic isolation. Middle-power nations can build continental empires, while superpowers destroy themselves through economic nationalism. You've grasped the strategic backdrop that eluded most Western observers, but now you're about to witness how Canada systematically executed the most ambitious infrastructure and alliance strategy in North American history, while America's tariff war cannibalized its own economy. The escalation timeline reveals a pattern of Canadian strategic brilliance that should serve as a masterclass in 21st century statecraft. The first phase demonstrated Canada's infrastructure independence strategy. While Trump imposed 35% tariffs expecting Canadian capitulation, Ontario announced a request for proposals for a cross-Canada energy corridor that would fundamentally reshape North American economics. This wasn't just another pipeline project. It was Canada's blueprint for energy independence that would connect Alberta oil and gas to Ontario refineries and new deep-sea ports on James Bay and Hudson Bay, completely bypassing American infrastructure. The genius of the timing was unmistakable. As Trump weaponized energy relationships, Canada announced they were building alternative routes that would make American energy partnerships optional rather than essential. The proposed corridor includes new Alberta to Ontario pipelines, port developments on James Bay and Hudson Bay, and potential refineries along the pipeline route. This wasn't defensive planning. It was Canada's declaration that they were building a post-American energy economy. The alliance strategy revealed even more sophisticated planning. While America isolated itself through tariff warfare, Canada and Mexico began the most productive bilateral relationship in decades. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum hosted Canadian Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne and Foreign Minister Anita Anand for strategic planning sessions that focused on economic growth, security, and trade diversification away from American markets. The Mexico partnership exposed the fatal flaw in Trump's strategy. Mexico successfully avoided 30% American tariffs by securing a 90-day negotiation pause, while Canada faced 35% duties but maintained their trade surplus. When Mexican Economy Minister Marcelo Ebrard told reporters they want to know how Mexico is getting these results regarding Canada's interest in their American negotiations, he revealed that both countries were actively sharing strategies for managing American economic aggression. The defense dimension added another layer to Canada's independence strategy. While Trump demanded continued military dependence, Canadian defense officials concluded they should maintain their F-35 fighter jet purchases, but began exploring European alternatives for future military needs. The Defense Review specifically questioned Canada's over-reliance on the U.S. defense industry, signaling a fundamental shift toward military independence that paralleled their economic diversification. The infrastructure investments revealed the scope of Canada's post-American vision. The Energy Corridor project represents billions in investment that will create permanent alternatives to American-controlled trade routes. Port developments on James Bay and Hudson Bay would provide direct shipping access to European and Asian markets, while Great Lakes ports would handle increased domestic and Mexican trade volumes. You've now uncovered the critical pivot moment that Washington completely underestimated, but what happens next exposes how Canada's infrastructure and alliance strategy created a cascading collapse of American economic leverage across multiple sectors and relationships. Be sure to subscribe to our channel if you're enjoying the video so far. You stayed through the escalating tensions because you recognize this wasn't just another infrastructure announcement. You were witnessing the moment Canada revealed they'd built a comprehensive strategy for North American leadership that renders American economic threats obsolete. The main event that shattered American assumptions came in the form of the most devastating economic comparison imaginable. Proof that Canada was building prosperity while America's tariff war was destroying its own economy. The breakthrough moment arrived when J.P. Morgan Chase released data showing that Trump's tariff policies would cost American mid-sized businesses $82.3 billion in direct costs. These weren't theoretical projections. They were mathematical calculations based on actual import patterns and tariff rates. At $2,080 per employee in direct costs, American businesses were paying for the privilege of economic warfare, while their competitors in tariff-free countries gained massive competitive advantages. The composition of those costs revealed the systematic damage Trump's strategy was inflicting on American competitiveness. Mid-size companies, which generate one-third of U.S. private sector revenue and employment, were disproportionately affected because they lacked the scale to absorb cost increases or negotiate better supplier terms. Unlike large corporations that could relocate operations, these businesses were trapped, paying Trump's consumption taxes while competing against companies with access to cheaper global supply chains. Simultaneously, Canada announced infrastructure investments that dwarfed anything America had planned in decades. The Cross-Canada Energy Corridor represents the largest infrastructure project in Canadian history, connecting Western oil and gas resources to eastern refineries and new deep-sea ports that would provide direct access to global markets. This wasn't just domestic development, it was Canada's strategy for becoming a global energy superpower independent of American infrastructure. The Mexico partnership data told an even more remarkable story. While American businesses faced $82 billion in tariff costs, Canada and Mexico were deepening economic cooperation that specifically focused on resilient supply chains, port-to-port lines of trade, artificial intelligence, and energy security. The contrast was devastating. America building walls while Canada and Mexico built bridges that enhanced. The defense implications added another dimension to Canada's independence strategy. The F-35 review concluded that while Canada would maintain their current fighter jet commitments, they were actively questioning their over-reliance on the U.S. defense industry. This wasn't just military planning. It was Canada's signal that they were building comprehensive independence from American systems across all strategic sectors. The Energy Corridor specifications revealed the true scope of Canada's ambitions. New pipelines from Alberta to Ontario, deep-sea ports on James Bay and Hudson Bay, refineries along the pipeline route, and enhanced Great Lakes shipping capacity. These investments would create permanent infrastructure that bypasses American-controlled routes while providing Canada with direct access to European and Asian markets. The psychological impact on global observers was immediate and profound. While Trump celebrated imposing tariffs that cost American businesses billions, Canada announced infrastructure projects that would generate decades of economic growth and strategic independence. The message was unmistakable. America offered economic punishment, while Canada provided economic opportunity. You witnessed what Washington refused to acknowledge. Canada had transformed what was supposed to be their economic submission into proof that middle-power nations could build continental leadership while superpowers cannibalized themselves through economic nationalism. But the immediate aftermath reveals an even more stunning demonstration of how America's strategy backfired across multiple dimensions. You saw through the facade of Trump's tariff celebrations to recognize the seismic economic damage they were inflicting on America itself. Now, you're about to discover how the immediate international response to Canada's infrastructure announcements triggered a cascading recognition that North American leadership had permanently shifted away from Washington toward Ottawa and Mexico City. The shockwaves hit American business communities within hours of the J.P. Morgan Chase data release. $82.3 billion in direct tariff costs, with individual companies facing an average of $2,080 per employee in additional expenses, revealed that Trump's economic warfare was functioning as a massive tax on American competitiveness. While Canadian businesses operated under 85% tariff-free trade protections, American companies were subsidizing their own economic disadvantage. More devastating was how the regional impact data exposed Trump's political miscalculations. The Pacific Northwest and Northeast, regions that had supported Trump's economic nationalism, faced the highest tariff costs when China-focused duties escalated. Areas near the Mexico border and in the Midwest, already struggling with economic transitions, bore disproportionate costs from Mexican and Canadian tariffs. Trump's trade war was systematically punishing his own political base. The corporate response revealed the deeper structural damage to American economic relationships. Mid-size wholesalers, operating on thin margins, faced impossible choices between absorbing tariff costs or passing them to customers who could source alternatives from countries with better trade relationships. Unlike large corporations with global flexibility, these businesses were trapped in Trump's economic nationalism with no viable escape routes. The international diplomatic cascade was equally damaging. Mexico's Economy Minister Marcelo Ebrard publicly explained that Canada was seeking to learn from Mexico's success in avoiding American tariffs, creating a formal alliance between America's two largest trading partners specifically focused on managing American economic aggression. The optics were devastating. America's neighbors collaborating on strategies to minimize American economic influence. Canada's infrastructure announcements accelerated international reassessment of North American leadership. The Cross-Canada Energy Corridor represented billion-dollar investments in permanent infrastructure that would reduce global dependence on American-controlled energy routes. European and Asian partners began exploring direct relationships with Canadian ports and energy suppliers, bypassing American intermediaries entirely. The defense sector implications compounded America's strategic isolation. Canada's review of their over-reliance on the U.S. defense industry occurred simultaneously with Spain rejecting F-35 purchases in favor of European alternatives. The pattern was unmistakable. American allies were systematically reducing their dependence on American defense systems while exploring partnerships that enhanced their strategic autonomy. Financial markets reflected this fundamental shift in North American economic gravity. While American markets showed increasing volatility with each tariff announcement, Canadian infrastructure stocks and Mexican partnership opportunities attracted international investment. The contrast was stark. America offering economic uncertainty, while Canada and Mexico provided stability and growth opportunities. The supply chain data told the most alarming story for American strategic planners. As American businesses faced mounting tariff costs, Canada and Mexico were building resilient supply chains and port-to-port lines of trade that specifically enhanced their independence from American economic systems. The trade war wasn't creating American leverage. It was accelerating the construction of economic alternatives that made America optional. You now understand the seismic reversal that occurred in just months of escalated economic warfare, but the long-term implications reveal how Canada's infrastructure and alliance strategy has permanently altered the balance of North American power in ways that will define the next generation of continental relationships. You've witnessed how Canada transformed American economic aggression into their own blueprint for continental leadership. And now you're about to grasp the irreversible changes that will define the next decade of North American relationships, changes that will position Canada and Mexico as the primary beneficiaries of America's economic self-destruction. The long-term infrastructure data reveals the most profound shift in North American economic architecture since the completion of the interstate highway system. Canada's Cross-Canada Energy Corridor represents permanent infrastructure that will function independently of American systems for generations. The Alberta to Ontario pipelines, James Bay and Hudson Bay ports, and Great Lakes shipping enhancements create alternative trade routes that make American infrastructure optional rather than essential for North American commerce. The alliance implications compound these infrastructure advantages exponentially. Canada and Mexico's formal cooperation on economic growth, security, and trade diversification has created the foundation for a post-American North American economic bloc. Their coordination on tariff-resistance strategies, supply chain resilience, and port-to-port trade relationships represents the institutionalization of economic partnership designed to function independently of American participation or approval. The energy sector transformation threatens American strategic influence across multiple dimensions. Canada's new deep-sea ports on James Bay and Hudson Bay provide direct shipping access to European and Asian markets without requiring transit through American-controlled waters or ports. As global energy demand shifts toward renewable sources and strategic independence, Canada's infrastructure positions them as a primary supplier to markets that are actively reducing their dependence on American energy systems. The defense implications extend far beyond military procurement decisions. Canada's questioning of their over-reliance on the U.S. defense industry occurs within a broader pattern of allied nations reducing their dependence on American defense systems. Spain's rejection of F-35 fighters, European exploration of autonomous defense capabilities, and Canada's infrastructure investments in strategic independence collectively represent the erosion of American defense industry dominance. The economic mathematics of Trump's tariff strategy reveals its fundamental unsustainability. American businesses facing $82.3 billion in direct tariff costs will systematically lose competitiveness to companies operating in countries with stable, preferential trade relationships. Canada's 85% tariff-free access to American markets, combined with their new infrastructure and Mexican partnerships, positions them to capture market share that American businesses are forfeiting through Trump's economic nationalism. The technological and innovation implications accelerate these competitive disadvantages. Canada and Mexico's cooperation on artificial intelligence and energy security represents strategic partnership in the sectors that will define 21st-century economic leadership. While American businesses struggle with tariff costs and supply chain disruptions, their North American neighbors are building integrated systems that enhance their collective technological capabilities. The financial architecture of North American trade is shifting toward systems that bypass American oversight and control. Canada's infrastructure investments and Mexican partnerships create trade flows that function independently of American financial institutions and regulatory frameworks. The precedent they're establishing suggests that developed nations can build prosperous economic relationships while minimizing their exposure to American political volatility. The demographic and political implications reshape the entire framework of North American relationships. A generation of Canadian and Mexican leaders has watched America weaponize economic relationships and responded by building alternatives that enhance their strategic autonomy. The lesson is clear. American economic threats have lost their effectiveness against properly coordinated allied responses, and the benefits of reducing American dependence outweigh the costs of maintaining volatile trade relationships. The timeline reveals the scope of this transformation. What began as Trump's attempt to demonstrate American dominance over neighboring countries became the catalyst for Canada and Mexico to build the infrastructure and alliances necessary for North American leadership that functions independently of American approval. The trade war that was supposed to restore American hegemony instead accelerated the construction of post-American economic systems. The psychological and strategic implications extend far beyond economics. Corporate executives, government officials, and international partners worldwide have watched Canada successfully resist American economic coercion while building continental alternatives that enhance prosperity and strategic independence. The model Canada has created demonstrates that middle-power nations can lead regional development, while superpowers cannibalize themselves through economic nationalism. You now fully understand what Trump's tariff war actually accomplished. It proved that American economic leverage over neighboring countries has permanently collapsed, while Canada and Mexico demonstrated that coordinated allied responses can transform American aggression into opportunities for building superior economic systems that make American participation optional rather than essential. The most devastating part? Canada used America's own infrastructure failures and policy mistakes to justify building better alternatives, turning American weakness into Canadian strength, while positioning themselves as the stable, reliable partner that international investors and allies actually want to work with for the next generation of North American development. If you've enjoyed today's video, please hit that subscribe button for more news.